well, still using the open row set functionality, still using file path, as I mentioned. And then there's something a little bit more convoluted down here where we're getting into additional filtering here. So multiple where clauses or multiple filters within the where clause, I should say, and then a whole bunch of aggregates being thrown in the data. I'm not going to run these right now, but just to give you some examples that, really once you've got that open row set bulk and format defined, you've got tremendous flexibility with the T-SQL language and the ability to, of course, then visualize that locally in the studio or through tools such as Power BI. It's just SQL after that. Okay, so that's the end of really this initial view. What I'd like to do now is switch over back to the Knowledge Center, and we're going to show you some different formats of data that you can work with and some tricks for working with that as well. So I'll come back to Home here and go back to Learn. We go through the same cycle again. I'm going to browse the gallery here, select SQL scripts, and what I'm looking for here is querying CSV files. So everything we've done so far has been with Parquet. But with CSV files, of course, CSV or delimited files in general is really the most common way that data is moved around. Rarely, Parquet is the format that actually gets sent. That's an optimization that commonly takes place after data has arrived. Most applications emit delimited files, and those delimited files, or perhaps a compressed encrypted variant, is actually what comes over the wire when you receive it. So we ran through the same process again, and here you can see that we're now working with CSV. And there's a couple of other things that you can see here as well. So let me start by running this query. We'll get a result set up. Oh, it's gray, so I gotta go back to my built-in, as I mentioned before, and we'll go run this. So what have we got here? Before, we did bulk before, we're familiar with that. We had format before, it was Parquet. But we've got two other additional parameters here. We've got the parser version. 2.0 is the most recent parser version. It's far more performant than the original parser version, so we default to that. I recommend that for querying over delimited file formats, you always put parser version 2.0 in today. And you can also see that it put the first row to start at 2. And so you've got flexibility, and this is frequently useful because often there are these header rows in delimited files. Now, whereas Parquet has a header, and we understand how to handle that, in delimited files, it's all just text. And obviously headers look a little different to the data, but that can be a little tricky to work with. So what I'm going to show you here is actually what happens if I move this back to 1. Header row 2 has just given me C1, C2, C3, which is generic column 1, column 2, column 3 across the data set. However, let's bring this back to first rows equals 1, and let's just see what's in there. So we'll go run the query again. It's reading down the file, and sure enough, here are some column names in my delimited file. And perhaps we want to work with these. Like these things, these have meaning. So it would be good to represent those at the top of my data set. For that, what I can actually put in is header row equals true. And I'm going to put that in, and I can run this again. And the query is going to run here. And you can see here, because I've told it I have a header row, it's taken those values and it's lifted them up into the actual header of the table here. So this is kind of useful. This is now how I would expect to work with the data. Now, there's nothing to say, of course, that I couldn't sort of move first rows back to 2 as well, but let's, with the header row being in there, but let's keep moving. The next example starts to do something a little more interesting. Right. So what you can see here is I'm actually, imagine I hadn't done that before. What I'm actually doing is I'm naming the columns, right? But the key thing here is that I'm not referencing the name explicitly, even though you can see date rep is the first column, and then as I count across 2, 3, 4, column 5 is cases, which is the 5 up here, and then 6, 7, 8 GOID is the 8th. These numbers, and the reason I sort of counted there, is to demonstrate the ordinal position of the columns in the data set. And so if I go run this query, This with clause means that